You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
Gavin's still rocking the light, so
I like the light.
Obviously, his eyes are not 100% fixed.
I can read without the light, but it's so much easier with the light.
Fair enough. So what are we talking about today? I feel like it's been a really long time since we recorded a podcast, so...
I know. I feel the same way. We must be. People must have just been sitting around being like, are they ever going to release another one?
Even though we're like several months ahead. So,
yeah, well, but it feels like it. So, going through the timeline like I do, and there were a handful of options for this point. We're still in 1969. We're a handful of options, and some I was like, okay, this one's kind of interesting, this one's whatever. But I thought, it's kind of a short one, which I know you like. And and I thought we'd talk about one of the quote-unquote good guys.
One of the good guys, so I'm assuming a cop, or?
It is an attorney general.
An attorney general, okay.
Yes. So
and obviously, if you're saying he's a good guy, that means he's not crooked or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying, like, instead of, a mob guy, we're going to talk about the guys who are not friendly with the mob guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're not saying he's not crooked.
Well, I don't think so, but I mean...
Well, you wrote the notes.
But that isn't what I mean. That was not the point.
Okay.
I don't think so, though.
All right. So, did you say this guy's name? I don't think
I did not.
So
this is Robert Warren, specifically Robert Willis Warren. If you know another Robert Warren, I'll narrow it down. So Robert Warren is born actually in New Mexico, of all places, in 1925. He was in the U.S. Army, 95th Infantry from 1943 to 46, so he caught World War II there. He served in Europe. He was wounded in France, receiving the Purple Heart.
Ooh. So
already, distinguishing himself as a young man. Getting out of the military, he married his wife, Laverne. He received a bachelor's degree from Macalester College. I don't know if McAllister?
McAllister, maybe?
McAllister? It could be McAllister. It's a funny spelling of McAllister, but that does sound better. McAllister. That sounds way better. Let's say McAllister. But yeah, that's not how I would spell McAllister. In 1950, a master's from the University of Minnesota in 1951. And a law degree from the UW Law School in 1956. He was temporarily also a foreign affairs officer with the U.S. Department of State in the 1950s.
But we don't. It gives so it sounds like he went to school in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So that's obviously how he ended up in Wisconsin. But we have no idea why. What brings somebody from New Mexico up to Wisconsin? Like, are you feeling the snow or what?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's
an interesting choice. I'm sure there's a really good reason for it, but I don't have that information, so I don't know. But yeah, definitely an interesting choice. And New Mexico in like the first half of the 20th century, I have to imagine it's a pretty laid back place. Because there's not a lot going on there. But, this guy's looking for some action, so he's got to come to Wisconsin.
Yeah. It just seems strange that there's probably a place a little bit closer to New Mexico that's got more action than Wisconsin does.
Well, yeah. So he is a practicing attorney in Elkhorn for a little while. Then he moves to Green Bay, where he's an attorney. Then he becomes the assistant district attorney of Brown County, which is Green Bay, from 1959 to 1961, then becomes the district attorney from 61 to 65. And then in 1965, he becomes a member of the state senate. He runs for state senate and gets elected, which he does from 1965 to 1969. So a lot of background on this guy, just busting it out here. Mm-hmm. distinguished military career, practicing lawyer, district attorney. This guy is he's moving up. He's doing good.
He's a great American hero.
Sure.
In all senses.
Sure. I mean, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, you're kind of telling this story like I'm expecting this to build up to this big blow up, and then he just becomes a mafia member.
No, it's not. It's not. Okay. No, this guy. So Robert Warren, if I were to pick like who is the guy who is like the enemy, the nemesis of the Milwaukee Mafia, Robert Warren is up there. Is he number one? Maybe. Definitely top three.
Okay,
like he's way up there.
So he's a huge part of the reason why we believe the mafia does not exist today.
Sure, yeah. I mean, he really comes hard for them. So, yeah, in 1968, he decides to run for state attorney general. The incumbent at the time was Bronson LaFollette, and Bronson LaFollette wanted to run for governor, and apparently, if you're going to run for one thing, you can't do the other, so opens up the position. And Bronson LaFollette at the time was also, he was kind of in a place where he was getting some flack from some people. He had just demoted a member of the state attorney general's office, a man named Leroy Dalton, from the head of the State Criminal Investigative Division. Dalton had brought charges against a Milwaukee banker named Howard Meester for his connection to a Milwaukee tavern. And when Meester was acquitted of the charge, he sued Dalton for libel. To kind of like push this aside, LaFollette demoted Dalton. And then politicians criticized LaFollette for demoting Dalton, and Robert Warren, our guy here, he gets on that train too. He comes out blasting against the Attorney General. So does Assembly Speaker Harold Freilich of Appleton. They come out and just blast him. And yes, I threw that in there because it's Appleton. They went out and they backed up Dalton. They said he's an honest man and it was unfair to demote him. Now, we're not really going to go into any of that because this is a completely side note. But this is like Robert Warren getting his foot in like for the statewide stuff. He's putting his voice out there on big issues that are affecting the state at the time. We might, I think very likely, will do an episode, if not a regular episode, a Patreon episode on the Dalton Meester thing that went down.
Okay.
It is Milwaukee Mafia adjacent. It's vaguely connected because the bank that Meester ran has some shady dealings going on. So we will return to that in one form or another at some point. It's not important to this episode, but he's an interesting character.
Okay.
Meester is, so so he's worth talking about, but not today. While running for Attorney General in October 1968, Warren says, "I'm convinced there is some organized crime activity in the state, particularly in the South and the Southeast," which is vaguely like Madison, Milwaukee, Kenosha.
Mm-hmm.
So he's getting out there. He's talking about it. Now, again, he's originally from New Mexico. He moves up to Elkhorn and then Green Bay. These are not organized crime hotspots.
Right.
But now that he's trying to be like the Attorney General for the state, he's got to get his thoughts out there on the matter. Bronson LaFollette, while running for governor in October 1968, appeared to agree with Warren to some extent. He said, "One of the most serious crime problems in Wisconsin is commercial gambling. Nationwide, it is a billion-dollar industry. In the state of Wisconsin, many millions of dollars are spent on illegal gambling. A large share of this money finds its way into the coffers of the organized crime syndicate." LaFollette said the problem was that the state gambling laws did not have a clear distinction between commercial gambling and the friendly poker game among friends. This ambiguity allowed law enforcement to be too tolerant of the gambling that wasn't strictly friendly. Now, I don't know exactly. I don't have an opinion on that of what the vagueness of the commercial gambling laws were. But it's an interesting point because this is the thing. Like, yeah, like if you and your friends are like hanging out at the American Legion and you're playing, poker or whatever for like a nickel a hand or something, police do not care about that. Like, is it technically illegal on the books? Yeah, it probably is. But that's not what the state is trying to crack down on.
Right.
So I think there is some kind of like we need to be more clear about when we say commercial gambling, what do we mean? Mm-hmm. Because, is it the nickel a game that's okay? Is it the buck a game? Like, at what point does it go from being friendly to being an actual problem?
But you know what the problem with that is, though? The minute they start doing that, now you give everybody a clear line of what's okay and what's not okay. So everybody just walks up to that line and sits there. And that's not really what you want either.
Is it not? Isn't that how the law works?
That's not what you want, because that's why they write laws so vague. So that they can kind of, for certain circumstances, they could be like, well, it says this, so you're violating the law.
Oh.
They can kind of mold it to, if they want to nail somebody for something, the law's vague enough that they can say, well, you kind of violated this part of the law.
Oh, well, I thought it was, you want it really clear so people know what the laws are. Like,
do you must read more laws than I do. Do you think
know.
Laws are clear?
Okay, let me say this. I think laws are clear when they're written most of the time. But I think that really good attorneys find ways to make the law not as clear as it first seems.
Okay, that could be a very valid point. That could be a very, very valid point. Yes. So they find a way to muddle the lines that were created in the law.
Yeah, like I think when the lawmakers are writing the laws, I think they know exactly what they have in mind, but they can't predict some of the weird loopholes and stuff that people are going to come up with.
Right, yeah. That is a very, very valid point, okay.
All right. November 5th, 1968, it's Election Day. The Republicans win every major statewide office in Wisconsin. Robert Warren is Republican, so that's good for him. They win governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, treasurer, attorney general. Warren beats his Democratic rival, who was a member of the Cudahy meatpacking family. So, he had that going for him. A well-known name. Nationwide, Republicans dominated as well, with Richard Nixon taking the presidency.
Woohoo!
And seats gained in both the House and the Senate. It had been a rough year for the Democrats with the assassination of Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and some violent protests over the Vietnam War. So Lyndon Johnson and the Democrats were really having a rough year in 68, which was great for Nixon. Mm-hmm. Which that's a whole other thing. But on the state level, that helped Robert Warren get in. Mm-hmm. So then he becomes the Attorney General of Wisconsin. In March 2nd, shortly after becoming the new Attorney General, he speaks publicly about his desire to get legislation that would weaken the mafia's grip on the state. He was convinced the mafia was in Wisconsin, but, quote, intelligence reports are one thing and provable evidence another. Warren had about 20 bills that he wanted to pass through the legislature, though he recognized that some of them were a little controversial. One, for example, would require the state justice department to sign off on any tavern licenses, something that local governments would probably fight him on. So, if that's not really clear I think that should be clear what he's saying. But he's saying, typically tavern licenses are given out by the city or the town or wherever you live. He wants them to be signed off on by somebody at the state Justice Department. I understand why he has that concern, but I understand why the local government would be very not okay with that. And also, seems like a lot of extra work.
I also, and I'm not really sure, what are we gaining by somebody at the state level signing off on it?
My impression is it's kind of like doing an extra background check on whoever's name is on there.
They have the resources to do a more thorough background check would be the idea.
Yeah, because the thought is if you have somebody who's kind of questionable asking for a tavern license, and their buddies all sit on city council's licensing committee,
they can
you get your tavern license.
Yep.
But you run it by the state, and the Justice Department does a background check, and they're like, this guy should not be running a tavern. They can shoot it down.
Okay, I can see that.
It makes sense, but it does two things. One, it takes authority away from the local government, which local governments do not like. And two, again, like, it's a lot of time and money and whatever. I mean, maybe not a lot of time and money, but enough. Like, this is Wisconsin. Like, how many thousands of bars are there? It'd be like a full-time job to have a guy approving those.
Right. And I feel like even if they would have, I'm assuming they never implemented this, correct?
No.
Yeah. And I feel like even if they did implement it, it would just be like these papers would go and sit on some dude's desk in Madison. And they would sit there for a month, and then finally he would take them out and sign them and then send them back. So all you're really doing is delaying the opening of bars instead of actually doing anything productive.
Yes.
You know, because it would become such a strain on the state government. They're not going to do the right background check because they just want to get the stuff off their plate. So
absolutely.
I do have a question about something you asked, you talked about before.
Oh, yeah, bring it up.
The Warren guy.
Yes.
He said in 1968, he's like, I have strong beliefs that there's the mafia in the state of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Again, I think I asked this question a lot, but by 1968, aren't we pretty well everybody very aware that there's a mafia in the state of Wisconsin?
Yes.
Okay.
So, yeah. It's always an ongoing thing where certain people, particularly on the local end, like in Milwaukee, kind of like to push back on that and say, no, you don't understand. But then, yeah, by this point, we had a guy, a senator in the early, I want to say 63, come out on the floor of the Senate, you know, in Washington, and be like, here are the heads of the mafia in the different cities across the U.S. And they laid it out. It's debatable, but it's not like nobody knows. Like, it's definitely been put out there.
Yeah. Like if he comes up and says there is a mafia in Wisconsin, everybody's gonna be like, "Yeah, we know, man." Right.
Now, I mean, this just could be me being cynical, but I think it's largely a political thing. This is my view of Robert Warren, and this is nothing against Robert Warren, but I think it made for a really good angle. You come out and you say that you really don't like organized crime. It's a good thing to run a attorney general campaign on, and you're not going to have anybody come out and be like, no, I think organized crime is good. So you know, you've got that going for you. And then you come in with these really strong bills he wants to pass, and he's using organized crime as like the reason he wants to do it. It's a really good reason to do it. And again, like, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, what he's doing, but I do think it's a strategy, a political strategy, the same as anybody today would do. You know, today, like, a hot topic is like child trafficking. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for saying this on the podcast. Child trafficking is not like the biggest problem in the state. It happens. It's an absolutely terrible thing and we should fight it. But you probably don't know a child that's been trafficked. It's not a common problem. Mm-hmm. But if you come out and you say, we need to stop child trafficking, no one's going to stand up and be like, no, we don't.
Exactly.
So I think it's kind of like that, where like I don't disagree with him as far as what he's saying, but I do think he realizes it's a good way to ride the political wave.
So it's basically he's leveraging the organized crime as a way to push along his agenda, the things he wants to see happen, basically.
Yes. Yeah. I guess, I mean, that's the game you got to play. Like now, again, you know, you say child trafficking or you say fentanyl, you know, that sort of thing. You're like, oh, okay, this is the guy we like because he's talking about the things we care about, you know, whereas if you look at, we're getting way off topic here, but I'm just my soapbox for the moment. You look at actual stats and you look like statistically, what are the biggest problems in the state? Those are probably not the things people are actually talking about. And so it's like the numbers aren't necessarily what you want to run on. It's what gets people excited.
Yep.
So whole side note there. But anyway, I think that this is what Warren is a guy who was district attorney in Green Bay. This is not a guy who like wakes up every morning and is like, oh, damn it, the mafia. No, I think he like knows that on the state level, this is what's going to get him something. So, he wants to pass a bill that if someone is convicted of narcotics trafficking, they'd have to forfeit their car. They'd have to turn their car over to the state.
Again, I'm not seeing the relevance between these two, but okay.
Yeah. He wants an anti-racketeering bill that would have a sentence of 20 years for anyone interfering with commerce through the use of threats or violence, that's already a federal law, but he's trying to look at it at a state level, so it doesn't have to be an interstate thing.
Okay.
He wanted higher penalties for bribing a witness, tougher penalties for commercial gambling, more ballistics testing on seized guns, and a variety of other things.
Now, because I'm stupid, what is ballistic testing? Is that like figuring out like the gun could have killed or something?
Yeah, so I don't know the exact wording of the bill, but my guess is that if you are arrested and you have a gun, they would want it tested and then those results put on file somewhere.
Oh, okay.
So if that gun did kill someone or ever does kill somebody, they can match up the bullets. And yeah, that's my assumption is what he's going for there. I don't know what you have to do to get your gun tested, you know, like how bad something you have to do is, because I don't think they test every gun that they seize, but, you know, they do many times. I mean, if you're a suspect, they clearly do. So I don't know exactly where that bar is at, but Robert Gendusa, the president of Milwaukee's Common Council, said, quote, anything he can do legally to make it more difficult for organized crime to operate should be supported. If you can take the profit from such criminal activities and eliminate any attitude that this is an easy state for such activities, then we certainly want to erase that illusion. He's got support on the local Milwaukee level as well. And yeah, again, like he's riding in high here, like this Republican wave. He's framing this as being against organized crime, which is, you know, going to get him popularity votes. And also, I know like now today, this is funny and it shouldn't be funny, but like Nixon and the people who came in with Nixon, they came in on a strong law and order platform. Okay. And I know because of like the reputation Nixon has, it's funny to be like, oh yeah, the law and order guy. But that was like their thing. At this point in time, like the electorate is clearly like they love that message. They love and I think this is in response to the fact that there had just been massive riots that summer. So they're like, yes, we got to get some laws and order out there. So it's the right time to kind of push these stronger ideas. On April 1969, Robert Warren sends a confidential letter to Racine's police chief, Leroy Jenkins. Although most of the letter that I have a copy of is redacted, Warren wanted any information Jenkins had on a long list of people in the Racine area, Included on that list were District Attorney Joseph Molinaro, State Representative George Molinaro, Alfred De Simone, an unnamed son of Pasquale Cosentino, an unnamed son of Eugenio Lamacchia, Joe Rizzo. Warren warned Jenkins that the investigation was highly confidential and he could not say too much without revealing the purpose. Many people on his list had a connection to either the American State Bank, beer distribution in southeast Wisconsin, or both. And almost everybody, like nearly every single person on that list, clearly had an Italian name. The reason I have a redacted copy of that is somebody passed the letter on to the FBI. I'm going to assume in this case it was Jenkins, the Racine police chief, who did. Not that it matters either way, but we learned from that Warren is definitely taking a really active look of being like, we got to gather information on these people. We got to find out what's what. And he's drawing a big net. And it's questionable, like how big his net is here when he's like calling in the district attorney to be investigated and everything else. But
and how many, like, you listed a bunch of Italian names there, and I recognize some of them. So some
Sure.
of them are probably mafia connected, but how many of them would you say are that you don't even know as even having much to do with the mafia?
I would say that of this, it's a bit of a stretch.
Most of them, like,
Well, so
because I heard of Rizzo, and I know we've talked about
Yeah.
Rizzo before, and
this is the thing. So, like, District Attorney Joseph Molinaro, he's in this weird gray area where I don't think that he himself is necessarily a bad guy. But it's one of those things where he grew up in an Italian community. He knows these guys. So, when one of these guys he went to high school with is supposed to be getting prosecuted for gambling, and he's like, yeah, I went to football games with that guy. He maybe isn't cracking down on as hard on them as people think he should be.
okay.
So it's one of those things where it's like when there's a stigma against the Italians and you've got an Italian district attorney who seems to be going light on some of the Italians,
yeah.
it looks like he's in on it.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the impression they're trying to paint. And my understanding is that is not he's not actively out there helping the mob. That's not who he is. But I do think you can look at it and see it be kind of doesn't look great.
Because, yeah.
But it's only if you look at it and you think that there's some kind of conspiracy among Italian people.
If
you
you
have to already kind of have that mindset to see it.
Right. If you ignore the fact that he may have been childhood friends or at least childhood acquaintances with these people, if you completely ignore that, it looks like he's being very malicious and very in favor of the mob. But really, it could just be that he knows these people and he doesn't want to see them go to jail for an extended period of time over something. And maybe he doesn't really think gambling's a big deal. So he doesn't want to enforce gambling laws as much either. So.
Yeah. And I mean, so I don't think that he's doing anything out of the ordinary. In theory, and I'm saying in theory very strongly here, in theory, district attorneys and judges are supposed to be impartial, but they are people.
Yeah.
And, if somebody they know shows up in their courtroom, they may not be 100% impartial.
They can't control that.
Yeah. So Warren is out campaigning in favor of laws to allow police to use wiretaps. Wisconsin has resident and operating organized crime groups. I have no illusions that the enactment of these proposals will resolve all our crime problems. However, adequate laws are one of the tools that law enforcement needs to maintain the balance of a democratic society. I ask that the legislature join with me to begin the job of helping rid the state of this cancer which threatens our society. Strong words. Strong words. So this is kind of like the interesting thing that I think we've kind of like mentioned this in the past, but we had the FBI get caught wiretapping Frank Balistrieri, Dominic Frenzy, and, you know, other people in other cities as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not legal. Like, wiretapping was not legal. And they got caught.
Mm-hmm.
And that was bad because the FBI was doing illegal things, which they're not supposed to do. And what's interesting is the response that came out of that. Like, yes, there were some people who came out and they were like, oh no, the FBI is out of control. But it seems like the dominant thing that came out of it was like, oh, we should make it legal for the FBI to wiretap people. Like, which is what happened, which is what ended up happening out of that. And so here now, Warren's pushing on the state level to allow police to do the same thing. And he gets a lot more pushback on the local level than the national level did. The FBI got this thing called the Omnibus Crime Control Bill, and they did get wiretapping passed in there. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you have to get it signed off by a judge. Like, they can't just walk around randomly wiretapping people, but I don't think it's that hard for them to get that warrant if they need it. The Wisconsin State General, I'm really off today. The Wisconsin State Journal wrote an editorial in favor of Warren's bills, claiming, quote, organized crime syndicates are draining millions of dollars from Wisconsin each year. They said the money comes from gambling, loan sharking, and vending machines. So we've got the Wisconsin State Journal, the Madison newspaper, backing up these stronger laws. So, like, again, like, the mindset is like they're on the same page here. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because I am looking back on this, you know, 50, 55 years later, and I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but it strikes me as like a really strong, like overly strong response.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but at the same time, that's based on your perspective of the mafia. And
well, yes, but I mean, just the laws in general, like not even about the mafia, but just like.
But all of those laws are being created to stop the mafia. And it's just like, I'm assuming that a big part of the reason why it was like this is because that was such a panic at this point in time.
Yeah.
And so they could do these really aggressive things and get them approved because people just wanted to get rid of the mafia. They didn't care about the fact that they're inflicting, you know, violating their rights. They just want to get rid of it. It's kind of like that, whatever, the Information Freedom Act or whatever.
No.
We don't want to go there.
No, well, no, that's you got the name way wrong. But it's actually really funny because as you started saying it, I had the same exact thought.
Yeah.
I had the same exact thought. So for our younger listeners, because now, you know, not that we're old, because we're not, but we're old enough now that there's people who were not around.
Yeah, when this all happened, too.
So in September 2001, there was an incident called 9/11, and it's terrible tragedy, but also sparked a really strong response, both militarily, but also on local domestic laws as well.
Right.
And what you're referring to is the Patriot Act.
Was it the Patriot Act? Okay.
Yeah. And the Patriot Act, a large part of that has now kind of been rolled back. It's been sunsetted, so it's not in play anymore. But one of the big things that came out of that is we found later that they basically had everybody's like cell phones and internets and everything else kind of running through a central processor. And you know, not that they don't have the manpower to listen to every single conversation. That's just not possible. But there was a ridiculous amount of information being gathered on people.
Exactly. And we all supported that act, and we supported it because they played it off as, hey, this is going to get rid of terrorism. And we were just like, do whatever you need to do to get rid of terrorism.
Exactly.
Had they come out and said, we're going to start listening to every one of your phone calls, we probably all would have been like, yeah, that's not okay. So
Right. And yeah, and like I said, I already did one tangent. I'm not going to do another tangent. But I see but the point that you're making to this is I see where you're going. Because to me, I'm like, oh, we're going to like loosen up their ability to wiretap. That doesn't sound like a good idea. But they're presenting it as, oh, don't worry, we're not going to wiretap you.
We're going to do this to stop mafia members.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, okay, let's do that then, you know?
Yeah, okay. That's a fair parallel.
Yeah.
Because, it's like, oh, we heard a rumor from John down the street that you're doing some shady stuff. We tapped your phone. Nobody wants that. But they were like, oh, don't worry, it's not you. We're just taking out these nasty guys.
Exactly.
Okay, I got you. Warren spoke to a group near Waukesha in September 1969. Quote, do we have organized crime in Wisconsin? Yes, we do. It is not active in narcotics, but works in Wisconsin in loan sharking, gambling, and has infiltrated into some types of businesses. We have a bill under study now which would help our department with this problem. Nothing learned from wiretapping is admissible in court as evidence, which is just the way organized crime likes it, since this is one way for them to legally keep control over each other. At this point, nothing is legally admissible from wiretapping. So that's why he's like, we got to get it. It's not legally admissible because it's not legal. Like that's why. November 1969, the state legislature expanded the attorney general's powers to investigate inter-county racketeering. Warren said, quote, organized crime's greatest protections and safeguards are anonymity and the support of its thousands upon thousands of victims who are either unaware or indifferent to the support they provide. Organized crime is bound by no moral or ethical standards and operates in any manner that suits its purposes, whether it be legal or illegal, humane or inhumane. It is a society that seeks to operate outside the control of the American people and their governments. That's kind of just a lot of just words. but his point here is kind of being like, we have to wake people up to the realities of it. And we've talked about this in the past as well, where, when you see a bookie, sitting in the corner of a tavern, smoking his cigar and he's counting up stacks of $100 bills, that's probably a shady guy. But, or, not to assume, sorry, bookies, but, but if you're out there and you give a $5 bill to somebody and you say, hey, I want to put this $5 on, the Buffalo Bills, and then that person turns it over to the bookie and then you get paid a week later or don't get paid, depending on how the bills do. You don't think of yourself as being involved in organized crime, but Robert Warren says, realize that's exactly what you're doing here.
It's very true.
Yeah. So it's like, you may not like what the mafia does, but you just paid them.
And you just supported everything they do.
Yeah. So that's his argument. And again, it's a logical argument. I think that there's a counter argument to that as well, but he's not wrong. He's not, but, so anyway, so this is Robert Warren. This is the end of 1969 at this point. So we'll kind of wrap that up. He is going to be the guy who's really once he's attorney general now, he is cracking down. He's trying to get these wiretapping laws. He's trying to strengthen other laws. He's been handed the power to go after what they call the inter-county racketeering, which that is pretty extreme.
Wow, inter-county. So as soon as you cross a county line, you're breaking the law.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really something. So he's getting really strong. Now I'm gonna fast forward a little bit here. Robert Warren is later nominated by President Nixon in 1974 to a seat on the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. He was confirmed, and he started his commission in 1974. He served as chief judge from 1986 to 1991.
Holy crap.
He was later appointed judge on the U.S. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or what we commonly call the FISA Court. In 1989, served that until 1996. And then he finally passed away in 1998. Like I said, we're not done with Robert. Robert Warren will come up again. So, like, don't me saying he's going to die in 98 is not me being like, we're done with Robert Warren. He's Attorney General at this point in our timeline. But I wanted to fast forward to the rest of that because after he's Attorney General, he gets appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District, which he sits there from 1974 to 1991. For people not familiar with the judicial system, that is the federal court that oversees Milwaukee. Like the Eastern District is Milwaukee, the Western District is Madison.
Okay.
So if you break a federal law in Milwaukee, you go to the Eastern District Court in Milwaukee.
Okay.
Which basically means that after he's Attorney General of the state of Wisconsin, he's still, when he gets this promotion, he's still the anti-mafia guy. Mm-hmm. Because from 1974 to 1991, if you break any of these federal mafia laws, you're in Warren's court. Mm-hmm. So we are not done hearing from this guy. Every federal law that they break in the 70s and 80s is going to go right to this guy.
And maybe I missed it, but you mentioned a whole bunch of laws that he wanted to get passed.
Almost none of which did.
Okay, no, almost none of them did.
Yeah.
Are we going to talk about at the ones that at a certain point that did get passed?
Yeah, things will probably come up. I mean, most of it, like the tavern one, and that licensed on the state level, that did not fly. Like, they got so much pushback on that, it got nowhere. Mm-hmm. But yeah, other things like the wiretapping people were more in favor of. So it was across the board. Like he put out the original 20 proposals. I think a handful got passed, but
which is probably normal, I would think, from a politician standpoint.
Yeah, but he came on really strong, and maybe that was the strategy. Maybe it was he's like, put out 20, and if I get 5, I still got something.
Well, and that's probably not a bad strategy too.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to see, like, if a guy like this doesn't exist, what does Milwaukee look like now? Do we still have a thriving mafia there? It's possible.
Possible. I mean, he's not the guy who would like bring them down. I mean, that falls to the FBI.
But he's driving a lot of it. Right?
I think so.
He's being an active player in that game.
Yes, I would agree with that.
The more players you take out, the weaker it gets, and at which point does maybe the mafia have a much better chance?
Yeah. It's interesting. Like it's very much a political game. Like, the law is the law. Like if you're a law enforcement officer, you enforce the law. That's your job. But when you're an attorney general, it's also political. Mm. And so, as I say, like when he's running and then when he gets the job and he's cracking down hard on organized crime, part of that, I think, is he truly believes in it. Like, I don't think he's a fake, but part of it, I think, is he knows that's the political wave to ride on. Mm-hmm. But then what's interesting is you've got the opposite end of that. You've got like the police chief of Milwaukee. And the police chief of Milwaukee, notoriously would always like downplay it, like, organized crime isn't really a problem here. I think it's whatever. And people would give him a lot of flack, being like, he's denying the existence of the mafia when everybody kind of knows it's here. And I think he deserves that flack. But again, police chief is not the same as like a regular police officer. It's a political position. Mm-hmm. And when you come out and you make a speech, you got two options, right? You come out and you say, crime is the lowest it's ever been. Or you say, crime is running rampant, right?
Which one do you think people like more?
Right. When you're the chief of police and you come out and you say, we have a mafia problem, you are basically saying, I fail at my job.
Yeah, exactly.
So that is where I think, like, I don't think the police chief truly ever was like, oh, there's no mafia. I think he had to be political about it and be like, we're doing a great job. And so if he comes out and he's like, oh, yeah, we just can't get a handle on this mafia problem, that's not good on him, unless he's using that to try to get more power and
to say we need to do this to make this stop, basically.
Right. I mean, then that's different. But in general, you don't want to go out and tell people that the thing that they're scared of, you're not doing anything about it.
Especially when those are the people that have to reelect you. And if they think you're not doing anything about it, they're not going to reelect you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff going on. That's all my notes. Oh, I hit the light. That's all my notes.
All right. So that is, I forget his name.
Robert Warren.
Robert Warren with some other name in the middle. But Robert Harris Warren, was it? Or
Willis. But we'll just call him Robert Warren.
But from the sounds of it, we'll be hearing a lot of him. So that's just kind of your little tiptoe into it. And you'll see what all kind of crazy stuff he does in the future episodes. So.
Yeah. Man, I hope I don't get a lot of backlash for our side, our tangents there.
No, I'm sure you won't.
Okay.
Do you get backlash a lot?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't. But I think like people don't like it if you say that child trafficking isn't like the biggest problem in society.
Yeah.
Because then it sounds like you don't care about. I care.
But just look at the numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so. All right.
I'm a numbers person. I'm not an emotions person.
So with that, do you want to? Well, how can people reach out to you, Gavin?
They can email MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. They can go to MilwaukeeMafia.com, and there's probably a contact link, top corner, bottom corner, somewhere on there, I'm sure, which would go to the same email. Yeah, that's about it.
Yep, and we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia. You can check that out. And I'm not, well, as of this recording being released, you should have started seeing, we are going back into the Patreon archives and releasing from the beginning, the very first Patreon we did into the feed on the off weeks.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Oh, how about that?
You're taking away the Patreon that they paid good money for. You're giving it out. It's content that's 2 years old, man.
Okay.
And the way I'm doing it, little secret, the content will always be 2 years old.
Okay.
Or older.
Okay.
So you can kind of get a taste of what the Patreon is like.
Oh.
So you decide.
Well, now I'll be more careful what I say on the Patreon, because sometimes I use potty mouth on there. But yeah, I recommend the Patreon as well.
It's $2 a month.
$2 a month, yeah.
Best bargain in podcasting.
And you get 2 episodes. That's like $1 an hour of this rambling. So why would you not want that?
So everybody can check that out again, patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia. You can also find that on MilwaukeeMafia.com. And we will be back next week with the Patreon episode, 2 weeks with the regular episode. We want to thank everybody for their continued support.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.